It's 2020, and it is the great age of the internet, the great age of information. And for the first time, we are able to hear their voices. We are able to hear the voices of the ancestors speaking to us. And we are also able to see their images plastered all over the world. And it do not look like they were slaves or savage cannibals, but that they were actually intelligent people who possessed a deep history and understanding of the world and the environment around them. Our ancient earthworks are so incredible that the only way to explain them is to say that they were built by aliens. Most of them are grotesquely mistreated by allowing grass and trees to grow up all over everything to hide what we've done, to hide our true connection, our true power, our culture. You often hear so-called black people say they're not black and that they have their culture. And then they proceed to tell you their nationality. I'm Nigerian. And then their ethnicity. I'm Yoruba. 98% of them would never mention the word Africa because it is not their word. African is an American word. And when you use the word African, they know who you are referring to, but they do not refer to themselves as Africans. So why are you called black? Who else in the world is called black? What is this strange title that the world seems to be compliant with a certain group of people being called, that seems to strip them of their nationality and their ethnicity, aka national sovereignty? Who's involved in keeping this horrible secret? Whoever it is, they felt it was equally important to keep the history of the Australian Aborigines out of the history books of black Americans, teaching us from maps that show America and Australia on opposite sides of the planet, knowing damn well they're part of the same lands.
What's so special about communities? What's so special about Wonkajunka that you guys should stay here and live your lives as you are?
It's about family, it's about being together, about culture, about keeping our children safe, and just connecting back, taking children back to country and connecting them back with the land. And we don't want us pushed off our communities or you to take our communities from us. Because what if we was in your seat and we took your land? How would you feel? So please don't do that. Because you're going to damage our heartbeat.
If it ever did come to it, would you just leave community or would you just fight?
We'd fight. We'd stay on here. We'd live in tents if we had to. Sleep out under the stars.
Danny Teach Johnson, speaking directly with the mob in the Kimberley region for NITV News.
The history of Australia and the history of the US is eerily similar. Besides the fact they are offset in history 180 years, these two countries are actually connected in many ways. Coincidentally, the history of these two countries parallels significantly. But nothing is a coincidence, right? If not for the Revolutionary War in 1776, England may have never had a reason to bother the Australian Aboriginals. It was custom at the time to get rid of their undesirables by transporting them to one of England's penal colonies, which is exactly what the U.S. was from the years of 1619 to 1776. But after taking a major L in the Revolutionary War, England had to find somewhere else to dump their undesirables. Unfortunately, it happened to be Australia. At the white man's school, what are the children taught? Are they told of the battles our people fought? Are they told how our people died? Are they told why our people cried? Australia's true history is never read, but the black man keeps it in his head. Both nations have populations of people classified as black.
The greatest island on earth, Australia, is a secret country with a secret history. Now that may sound strange because Australia has always projected a very clear image of an open and fortunate society. And yet there are few countries in which an historical conspiracy of silence has been so complete as here in Australia. This was a frontier country, and it still is. On one side of the frontier in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, they were the English poor and Irish political prisoners sent by Britain as slaves.
By 1788, around 500 Aboriginal tribes or nations occupied the Australian landmass with efficient and sustainable systems for living off the land. They achieved a balanced diet by hunting and gathering, moving seasonal between camps and food supplies dedicated. Fire was used methodically to burn old growth and encourage new. Being mobile, possessions were minimum. They had complex religious beliefs, sophisticated social relationships, and trading links across the continent. In 1788, the first European settlement, British latest penal colony, was established at what is now Sydney. The effects were catastrophic. With the convict soldiers and settlers came diseases to which Aboriginal people had no resistance: thyroids, flu, smallpox, and venereal disease. The next 100 years saw Aboriginal people forced out of their country, dispossessed of habitable lands, shot, poisoned, and massacred as successful waves of British settlers sought land for building.
I think it is our greatest victory that we have hung on to our humanity. I think it is not true that we have been dehumanised in the way that so many other peoples of the world have been dehumanised by decolonisation. And in fact, it frustrates many of our white sympathisers that Aboriginal people are still so kind and prepared to accept white people on their own terms.
In the 1950s, the British government carried out a number of nuclear tests, dubbed Operation Buffalo, on the homelands of the Australian Aboriginals. Between the years of 1953 and 1957, they dropped more than 5 nuclear bombs on the grounds of the land being classified as a terra nullius, aka unoccupied land.
Can't go anywhere else. This is my own homeland here, our homeland.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
bomb went off. The smoke went up. Oh, look over there. That turned into mushroom. But next day it was really dusty and smoke, misty. My mother was crying. My mother think that there was a war going on. We wasn't thinking about radiation. That was poison to kill us. No. All that water we was drinking, radiation, everything was poison. Another bomb went off. They don't care. They're living good over there, wherever they come from. They can die. They can all die. Yeah, we love for this. What else can we do?
During the civil rights movement in the mid-1900s, colored people, so-called black people in America and Australia, both fought for equal rights and civil liberties. Although you may have never heard of their indigenous civil rights movement, they sure heard of yours. For some reason, everybody knows about the American Negro.
Hello and welcome to Living Black. I'm Carla Grant. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the 1965 Freedom Rides, an event despite making international headlines and being considered a major turning point in political history was quickly forgotten by the Australian public. It all started on the grounds of Sydney University when 29 university students set out on a journey throughout Western New South Wales to raise awareness about living standards, segregation and racism experienced by Aboriginal people.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition.
Originally, the goals of the civil rights movement was to help Negroes who lived in urban ghettos, who was moved off reserves by the government. They fought for sovereignty of land and people, preservation of culture and traditions, enforcement of old treaties and laws, and restoration of seized lands. Originally, the Aboriginal indigenous civil rights movement was for equal rights, equal wages, restoration of traditional land, and the enforcement of old laws that deprived the Aboriginal people of their civil liberties. Translation: same old shit. So the great ancestors chose to attack with an economic boycott. After years of oppression and trickery, they learned to speak the only language the corporations understood: currency. In 1955, and of course I know you guys know this, Rosa Parks, a member of the NAACP, refused to give up her seat to a white man. The police were called, she was arrested, and this is the moment that most people agree sparked the civil rights movement in America. Negroes all across Montgomery refused to ride the bus for about 2 years until they broke the backs of the corporations in Montgomery. The Australian Aborigines chose a different approach, but still speaking the language of the corporations. In 1966, approximately 200 Australian Aborigines walked off their jobs, refusing to work because of low wages and land rights. Little did they know, this would be a 7-year vacation. Eventually, other Aborigines did the same, forcing their plants to close, and also broke the backs of the corporations in Australia. Both movements were started as grassroots movements to force the government to honor treaties and laws that were already on the books. Although it is always presented that our ancestors died for our right to vote, or the narrative that we got our right to vote during the civil rights movement, all we really got was the right for them to protect the rights that we already had on the books. But the most important thing that we fought for was our national sovereignty, which we won, and lost very quickly. The CIA launched COINTELPRO in order to take out Negro leaders. Then they sent in fake leaders in order to push the Pan-Africanism to the community. The rights to the land was won too, but orchestrated by the CIA, they flooded the Negro neighborhoods with drugs and removed businesses to create ghettos, lowering the property value. Once everyone was hurting enough, they signed the paperwork and sold the land. In other cases, they lent money to old people, knowing that they would die before they were able to pay the loans back. Once they died, the bank seized the land, and voila. We also won the better housing and living conditions, and new homes were built for Negroes all across America, if that's what you want to call the projects. The Australian Aborigines also won their land rights. Well, what was left of their land after the bombs. Unable to survive off the land because of the bombs, the corporations were able to cut off the utilities to hundreds of Aboriginal communities, forcing Aborigines into their next step of colonization: urban ghettos. Despite all of these eerie coincidences, it actually gets more creepy. This also happened in the Pacific Islands. Same movement, same point of time. They even had their own Martin Luther King type figures that led their people to civil liberty. Of course, it is much more things to cover about the civil rights movement of all three locations, things involving stolen generations and Indian boarding schools and all sorts of atrocities committed on the Aboriginal race. But as for now, I digress. May the ancestors continue to guide you with their wisdom. Honor to the ancestors and all praises to the Most High. Until next time, family. Peace.